So I grew up poor and now I live around a whole bunch of rich people. And recently I had this moment of clarity because over 2 different weekends, I ended up at 2 different barbecues, and I'm going to call them Rich BBQ, Poor BBQ. And all of a sudden I realized something that wasn't just a fluke. I realized something that is kind of a hidden secret of the rich that nobody really talks about. And yet it's all we talk about. So let me explain. So when I go to the Poor BBQ and I'm hanging out with these people that, friends, family, different things like that, the primary conversations that are being had are usually around things like sports, entertainment, gossip, different things like that. And when I go and I'm hanging out with my rich friends, the things that we end up talking more about are things like investing, networking, how our businesses are going, how our careers are happening, what aspirations do we have, are there opportunities that we're looking at, and just what do people think about them and running it past them. And I realized that that wasn't just a one-time thing that happened this weekend. Anytime I'm interacting with these 2 different groups, I find that that tends to be the majority of the conversation. Now, I'm not saying that rich people don't have fantasy football teams and they don't ever talk about sports. It's not true whatsoever. And I'm not saying that poor people aren't ever talking about money or investing or anything like that. Okay, that's not what I'm saying at all. But what I found was that the heavy majority, we could use a Pareto principle here, use the 80-20 rule. It really is an 80-20 split between those topics. Poor BBQ, 80% of the time. Gossip, sports, entertainment, 80% of the time. Rich BBQ, investing, opportunities, networking, different things like that. And I just thought it was so interesting because we think about it and it's like if we are an average of the people, of the 5 people that we hang out with the most, what is that saying? We know we are what we input into our head. So what is going in there? What are we spending our time conversating about? I honestly think that by the time you are 28 years old, you should have at least one really good friend that you were talking business about, you were talking investing, you were talking, growing in your careers, you were talking about aspirations and what you're trying to accomplish this year. If you're not talking about that literally almost every single time you see that friend, well, then you either need to get new friends or 2, you need to do a better job of facilitating those discussions with the friends that you do have. And if they don't want to come alongside you and talk about it, then, that's not going to be the person that's going to help you grow. A lot of times when you listen to football players and, other professional athletes who grew up in extreme poverty, they'll talk about like how they had to get out of that neighborhood and how they had to get away from those people and how it was really holding them down. And that's because it's an unfortunate, part of reality. But for people who don't want to change, who are content and happy with their lives, maybe not happy, but they're at least content with, where their life is, and there's not enough pain to get them to want to move. When they see you bettering themselves, I've experienced this in my own life. When people like that see you bettering yourself, they tend to make fun of you. They tend to pull you down. They tend to tell you not to do these things. It doesn't mean that they don't love you. It just means that, and again, it doesn't even mean that they don't want what's best for you necessarily. But what it does mean is that if you're in the same situation as them and you start doing better, well, then it illuminates the fact that they're not doing everything they could to make their lives better. And then that makes them feel really shitty. So that's something that ends up happening. There's a psychological concept called survivor's bias. When people do make it out of these really impoverished situations and they're looking back at their family and friends and everybody's kind of stuck back there and nobody's making the changes. And a lot of times you find that these athletes and these different people, they get all this money, right? That they are rich, but then they don't hang out with rich people. They don't go to the Rich BBQ. They're not having Rich BBQ conversations. They're not talking about the investing, the networking, the marketing, different things like that. And that's really important because they make this money, but they're still hanging out at the Poor BBQ all the time. And when I say Rich BBQ, Poor BBQ, I'm not necessarily referencing how much money these people have in the bank. There's definitely an element to that. But really more what I'm talking about is the mindset that these people have. Because I've been to barbecues where people don't have a lot of money, but they're on the come up. They're really progressing. They're talking about all the right things. They're making moves, and they're having rich barbecue conversations. So again, this is just as much of a mindset thing. And sometimes, the results of how nice the house is at the barbecue, that just comes down to timing. But if you are constantly sitting there talking to people about investing, networking, markets, opportunities, aspirations, different things like that, and that's where you spend 80% of your conversations, nothing's going to stop you. Nothing. Because it doesn't matter what it is that you do. If you obsess over it, if you put the effort into it, just those two things right there, constantly talking about it and putting more effort into it, will set you ahead of the majority of people in your field. Because the majority of people just don't care that much. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. You will be able to get ahead just on effort alone. I promise you. So that's the difference between, Rich BBQ, Poor BBQ. I really thought that from a mindset perspective, this speaks a lot to where we are in our lives. Again, if you don't have somebody in your life right now that you can talk investing, you can talk, what you're trying to do in your career to get better, you can talk about goals, you can talk about what you want for your life and how you want to make things better, you can talk about health and wealth and all these other things. If you don't have somebody like that, then you either need to find a friend that you can start having those conversations with and be intentional with it, or you need to go out and you need to find a new circle of friends. Because if, just like these professional athletes, we see it all the time, some guy making tens of millions of dollars and then he goes broke a couple years later. Why? Because, he got rich, but he stopped hanging out at the Rich BBQ, or he never started hanging out at the Rich BBQ. He kept hanging out at the Poor BBQ, made bad decisions in the long term, and then at that point, the amount of money that he had just doesn't matter anymore because it's going to get squandered. It's going to get spent on stuff that's, going to be liabilities over assets. And then whenever his career is up due to retirement or injury or whatever ends up happening, then what? There's no knowledge in order to go and make more money, and he would have squandered one of the greatest opportunities that he'll ever have in his life. So remember, flip it upside down, okay? 80% of your time at minimum should be spent on rich barbecue conversations, investing, dreams, aspirations that you have, networking, opportunities, whatever the case may be. Only 20% of the time should be spent on poor barbecue conversations, gossip, sports, entertainment, things that aren't going to contribute to your well-being overall. Do that, and you will start finding yourself at nicer houses with nicer barbecues.